I am honored to welcome our panelists. First, we have Kyle Wimmer, a high school visual arts teacher from Colorado, Leanne Dodge, a program director for a Drug-Free Communities Coalition, and Robert Ostbye, the state policy coordinator from Florida Department of Health's Bureau of Tobacco-Free Florida. I want to give you a little background before our speakers begin. In 2022, more than 3 million US middle and high school students reported having used a tobacco product in the past 30 days. E-cigarettes continue to be the most used tobacco products among these students. Evidence shows that the tobacco industry, advertising and promotion influences young people to start using tobacco products. A 2019 study across 30 US cities found that an average 63% of public schools were located within 1,000 feet of tobacco retailers. So in 2014, as we think about this, the United States Department of Education released Guiding Principles, a resource guide for improving school climate and discipline. And in March 2023, the guidance was updated with a new title and more research. The Guiding Principles for Creating Safe, Inclusive, Supportive, and Fair School Climates, which feature specific recommendations for evidence-based practices that allow students to learn, grow, and be successful. School suspensions have long-term impacts. Students who are suspended miss time in the classroom and are at risk for not graduating on time, repeat a grade, drop out, or become involved with the criminal justice system. Suspensions also affect a greater proportion of students of color, students receiving special education services, students from low-income families, LGBTQ+ students, English learners, and male students. Most young people who vape want to quit. Suspending students who violate a school's tobacco-free policy is unlikely to help them quit tobacco use and could alter their academic and future goals. Because young people have been unfairly targeted with marketing tactics, the science of addiction, and the long-term consequences of suspension, schools should provide a supportive environment and encouragement to quit using tobacco products, not suspensions. I look forward to hearing from our panelists about their experiences. Kyle, we'll begin with you.
Thank you. So my name is Kyle Wimmer. I teach at Mountain Range High School in Westminster, Colorado. This is my 20th year teaching, and I just retired after 21 years of coaching track and field to start doing more work in this area in itself of just being supportive of students. As I think at this point, athletes always have coaches, and kids that are trying to get off of NIC, let alone anything else, they're not going to always have as many people. So that's basically me quickly in terms of who I am. I'm a very empathetic teacher. I've always started with the human first. So in my classroom, I teach photography, I teach AP Art History and AP Tutor Design. And knowing that I'm an elective, I know that kids choose to be in that room. And I also know that my role in the grand scheme of things is not everyone's going to become a professional photographer, but they're all going to become citizens of this country, or just a model citizen, hopefully in general. So I try to relate and bring in the real world all the time. With that being said, 8 years ago next Thursday is my 8-year sobriety anniversary, where I had to come to the reality of being an alcoholic. And I'm really open with my students about that. I was as a coach as well as a teacher. I don't talk about it every day, but I don't shy from it. I don't hide from it whatsoever. So on those anniversaries, I would usually not come to school because those are my days. But then I started realizing I could use my own rock bottom as a teaching tool and a device to help relate, because I was noticing vaping was becoming more and more prevalent in our schools. And that was leading to other things as well, obviously. So I ended up being a guest teacher for myself, a guest speaker for myself last November 2nd. And it was a really powerful, impactful day where all my classes, we just talked about vaping and nicotine, and they were so honest and open about it. And you could just see that there was this thirst for wanting to either talk about it or get off of it. Some of them I meet them where they're at too when we start talking about it, if they come to me directly. But there's definitely a thirst or a want to talk about this, especially, and I hope in my room, I think it's been kind of proven this way, that it's a safe space for kids to come to and talk about generally anything, but specifically with Nick and vape, as we've all been noticing, it's getting worse. I ask my students, how many in this building do you think vape? And it's almost always like 70, 80, 90% of the kids vape. When I do an actual poll though, it ends up being 20 to 25% of the kids that are vaping. And I don't know if how accurate it is, because there might be afraid of like punishment or me coming down on them. But at this point, they already know that that's not who I am. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help at this point. So on that day last year, I asked and challenged kids to turn in their vape pens and just try to go 24 hours. And I had one come in. And then from that one, of seeing just one coming in, I had over 100 vape pens being turned in willingly. Kids that are trying to stop, that they're wanting to stop. And I don't do anything with punishment. It's non-punitive. So I'm trying to be proactive rather than reactive. My administration knows what I'm doing, that if a kid is willing to stop and wants to start that dialogue, they can come to me and talk to me and turn in that vape pen. And I have a bin in my room it just says literally, if you're willing to stop, drop it in here. And I have candies, I've got suckers, I've got gum flavored toothpicks, other resources like Sharpies and Zen Doodle coloring books for them to stay focused, or at least distract themselves enough to not go into that restroom or to not hit or rip their vape in a way that they probably would normally by going out to the parking lot, or again, like going to those stalls. So I ended up even coming up with a club called the Phoenix Club of, if kids got suspended, that they were referred out to me, or if they wanted to willingly come to me first, that we would just meet Tuesdays after school, 3:30 to 4 o'clock, and talk about our struggles and what's working for others, because it is not one size fits all, that's for sure, with how much or how little they are vaping or how long they've been doing it. And with all these vape pens coming in, we were thinking, like, what are we going to do with these besides dispose of them? And being an art teacher, I thought about, let's make it into art. So a couple of my kids, because it's a photo class, we photograph these works of art, but I also had a student start making plastic casts of a mannequin that I had in the room. And then she started filling it in. I had this
Kyle, you accidentally muted yourself.
Oops, my fault. So I've got these posters around the school. We have works of art that have been created so far with photography, where this is called Decisions. And he's looking at the pencil and looking at the vape pen and have his head going back and forth. This one is a plastic cast filled with cotton and red lights put on the inside with voluntarily turned in vape pens. This one is called Intrinsic Motivation, where it's again, plastic. This is just tape with a handful of tape, or handmade out of tape too, and a vape pen hanging straight down. The restrooms are becoming worse and worse, where 3, 4, 5 people at a time are in the stalls, and people genuinely want to use the restrooms. They can't because people are vaping. Now, this was set up, this was staged for this one in particular. That's not real vape. That's all AI. Photoshop's amazing right now that you can just put anything you want to in there, basically. In terms of like the pressure even at home, where like parents are like saying it's not that big of a deal, but kids are going, no, it actually is a big deal. And here's the one that was a full body mannequin where students, these are all the 100 vape pens that were turned in, that we filled halfway up roughly. And this one actually a gold medal at Scholastics this last year. So it's trying to turn a positive into a negative. And the last one I want to show is just, I know that Nick is like that domino effect of once that dopamine is reached and taxed out, they're going to look for something else. And that's my fear with either weed or alcohol or even worse. And here's a couple of my kids from last year too. That's basically my story. I feel like my timer is going off on my watch because that probably means that someone else needs to get in there. So that's my story.
Kyle, thank you very much, and for your passion and willingness to help young people to prevent them from using e-cigarettes, and then to help those that are using them to quit. Your passion has helped so many. And this is from one teacher's perspective. Now we're moving on to Leanne, who's going to talk from a school perspective. Leanne, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. And Kyle, that was so great. I loved seeing that. I was like having trouble breathing, looking at those visuals. So I'm a prevention specialist here in South Portland, Maine, and I'm luckily housed in the high school. I work as one of the Drug-Free Community Coalition directors. There's over 700 of them in the country, and we have about 16 of these coalitions in Maine. And when I started 7 years ago, I inherited an action plan that said we are changing the school policy to being restorative instead of punitive. And that happened back in 2016, 2017. And so we got started and we changed the policy. It got passed in 2018. And I want to just really fast tell you what the policy is. And then I want to share successes with it, because people want to know that part. Most importantly is it working? And so our policy, and I think you'll be getting my email, and if you ever want all the cool flow charts and handouts that we have and how to make this happen in your schools and your communities. So instead of back in the day, if you got caught using any substance, you were sent home for 7 to 10 days with no real support. You might get 1 day knocked off if you met with a social worker. And, just thinking about, well, what do you think someone's going to do for 7 to 10 days at home, and how are their academics, all those things. So we used our whole coalition to change the policy so that instead, this is what happens. If you get caught, there might be, you probably go to the assistant principals first, then a wellness check from the nurse. If our school resource officer needs to be involved, if there's some dealing or things like that going on, he might be involved in this. And then we call your parents, they come and get you. And the very next day you return to school and you get formally assessed by our school social workers, which we now have 3, which is great. Capacity is really an important piece to all this. And then due to that assessment, like we just screwing around, it was the first time I ever even seen a vape pen, or you've been using, some kids has started using in 7th grade during COVID and now are really addicted to it. So depending on where they're assessed, that determines kind of the response plan. So we have a vape intervention, or we also have a program, Prime for Life, that students might need to attend, which is all based on motivational interviewing and stages of change. So they might do that. They also spend a day or up to 2 days in our in-school restorative practice coordinators classroom, and they need to go through the behavior chain. If you're familiar with restorative practice, they have to write out the answers to questions. What were you thinking at the time? Who did you harm? What affected your choices? What might you do differently in the future? And then there is a response plan meeting with the parent, the assistant principal, the in-school coordinator, perhaps a social worker. And again, the student needs to go through this process and share their responses with this group. And so restorative practice, I know a lot of people think it's just like a hug and say you're sorry, it's not fun. Think about, when was the last time you apologized to somebody or took accountability? In fact, when we first started, we have a youth committee, and they said, I think we'd rather be suspended. You're like, what? And so this process is, pretty elaborate in that we want to help students. And we also changed our athletic code so you don't get kicked off sports teams. Back in the day, in some schools nearby, you can get in trouble once as an athlete. The second time, you're banned from sports all 4 years. And you think, you ask students like, hey, is sports like the one thing you like about school? Many hands go up. So imagine taking that away. So now we use the same restorative practice with athletes, and they don't get to play in games for 10 days, but they still go to practice and meetings and can still participate. And that's been a huge shift as well. So I wanted to share with you a few success stories from all these key stakeholders. I just have 4 quick ones to share with you in my time. The first one is from one of our assistant principals, and he said that he had a student last year who refused to undo his pockets with his paraphernalia. Like, I'm not doing it. And you can see a lot more resistance these days, or pushback from students. But because he really thought, if I do this, I'm going to be kicked out of school for a week or more. So the assistant principal assured him, you're going to go home today, but you're coming back tomorrow. And so the student undid his pockets, and that was a year ago, and he has since then stopped vaping, and has a better connection with the assistant principal and got support that he needed. So again, really treating this as a clinical issue and not a punitive one. The other success story is from another assistant principal. We have 2 for 1,100 kids, which is a lot. And she was sharing that a student who had been caught a couple times has now continues to work with our social worker, and has a much better connection with the assistant principal and our school engagement coordinator, and has also stopped using. So when you think about, wow, these folks, back when we first started, students had to see the social worker just that one time, but 70% kept seeing her, even though they didn't have to anymore. So again, that it's really important to know that support. And then the last couple of good stories or real life things happening is that, again, the in-school restorative practice person has had a student that was using for a long time, and having gone through this process, he also has stopped using substances. And finally, we passed the tobacco ban last April in South Portland with a lot of our students who gave testimony. But we've had 3 students come to the social worker and say that they are really trying to quit and are stopping because of the flavor ban. They can't get their hands on it, and their supplier is charging them more because now Portland, South Portland, and hopefully the whole state will go flavor free. So just those 4 stories of success around it. Students are changing their behavior because of this policy, and because they're getting support and not punishment is a huge thing. And then just finally, we have a group of students, our prevention kind of subcommittee of just youth. I think we often forget to involve youth in the work. We kind of go when I was your age, we didn't have computers, all right, that doesn't really help. Let's get with the people that know what's going on. And our group started with 3 students, and now we've had over 400 in the group, 60 siblings, and this is the high school, and we also have a middle school group. But our students are trained in a program called Sidekicks, which is through the tobacco folks. Check it out. It's in Maine, and it's 2 to 3 45-minute sessions on teaching students how to talk to their peers about risky behaviors. And they're taught motivational interviewing skills, like how would you talk to students about that? And so really thinking about involving all the stakeholders in your community. And finally, just knowing, with law enforcement, the chief at the time when we changed our policy, he said, when you kick someone out of school, they're not at home, they're out and about. And so really thinking about keeping kids connected academically. We have much better relationship with parents because we're not going like, hey, come get your kid for 2 weeks and get them out of here. And so really students are not falling behind. And we've seen a decrease in violations, which was our whole goal, is that in the beginning, we probably get a lot, but over time, people will go, wow, it's not worth it to have to go through all this. So please reach out to me and I can go on and on, but I'll stop talking because I bet my time is up.
Thank you, Leanne. And you definitely brought out the point of saying we have to support the kids, our youth, and not punish them. They're not bad kids. They're addicted to nicotine, and we need to support them and help them. And next, we're going to turn it over to Robert, who's going to give us a view at the state level of offering alternative to suspension program. Robert, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Randy. Fantastic first-person perspectives from Kyle and Leanne. I'm feeling the serious effects of fear of missing out, FOMO, because we don't really get that at the state level. We're kind of up here. So I'm going to give you kind of an overview of how we decided to provide our alternative to suspension courses and the statewide outcomes that we've seen as a result. So again, I'm Robert, and in my role, I'm responsible for directing the school-based initiatives for our local tobacco prevention programs at the county level. Since the explosion of vaping among youth across the country, Tobacco-Free Florida has really dived back into school-based policy work head first so that we can help school districts establish strong tobacco-free school policy and also drive implementation efforts so that we can ensure existing policies can have their intended effect. Our work with schools really takes the form of community-based interventions, and our local program staff leverage coalitions and youth advocates to recommend sound tobacco-free school policy and provide implementation support. However, these policy and systems change goals are often achieved over the long term, and it would be really nice to have something a little more immediate, and that's kind of what we're talking about today. One of our top priorities for our school-based community interventions is promoting supportive approaches to enforcement instead of harmful punitive consequences. And our argument for that really is pretty straightforward, and it's one that you've heard already here today. Nicotine is highly addictive. When youth are caught vaping at school, there's a good chance they're already addicted, and under this assumption, if you take a student out of school, you're just going to increase their opportunity to continue that tobacco use or that vaping and inadvertently intensify their addiction, most likely. When we're preparing to officially renew our work in tobacco-free schools back in 2020, we evaluated codes of conduct across all 67 county-level school districts throughout our state so that we could better understand how our schools were approaching enforcement for students caught using tobacco or really vaping in school. What we found was disappointing, but honestly not very surprising. And I'm curious to see if this would surprise any of you to hear of these kind of numbers for your state. But for us, 60 out of our 67 school districts, or basically 9 in 10, used out-of-school suspension as a primary consequence for vaping infractions in school. As Leanne pointed out earlier, one of the most important and frankly, one of the most simple things we can do is to keep students in school. Doing that can at least keep them in the supervised environment while increasing access to resources, which can hopefully help them quit for good. And this really is the main recommendation for me is, we can always do something. I think Kyle's presentation did a great job of demonstrating that. All you really need is someone who's willing to work with these kids, someone who cares enough to put forth an effort or a program that they can use. So in 2020, we partnered with a tobacco education program inside one of our school districts in Palm Beach County. So shout out to the Palm Beach County Tobacco Prevention Program. They developed virtual alternative to suspension courses for students. These courses are an option that school administrators can use. And when they choose to use them, what they're doing is they're essentially providing their students with a way to avoid the harmful impact of out-of-school suspension while also receiving important education about tobacco and vaping. Information that they probably wouldn't get from sources like social media or their peers. A little bit info about these courses is they're free to use. They are less than 3 hours total, and they're completely online interactive content. They're also available 24/7 because they're online, making it fairly easy for schools to implement. Typically, the way this will work is students would have a 7-day deadline to complete the course after they're caught vaping in school. And if they complete it within the 7-day deadline and present their certificate of completion, they can avoid their out-of-school suspension or kind of hold them in abeyance, I think is the terminology. Although some schools have taken different approaches to implementation using things like in-school suspension instead. Every year, we evaluate the courses and explore opportunities to expand their impact. And we've actually come a long way doing this. So we started with 2 student courses, one for middle school and one for high school. Over the last few years, we've added a course for elementary school students, unfortunately, because we really needed one. We've also added a second offense course to give students a second chance. So we thought this was important considering the potential for addiction and how difficult it is to quit. And, we really don't want to underestimate that. This year, we're working on adding Spanish language versions of the course for students who primarily speak Spanish. We have a lot of them in the state of Florida, and looking into splitting the elementary level course into multiple versions so that we can account for the major differences in age, right, between kindergarten and fifth grade. As far as outcomes, we kicked these courses off in August of 2020. Over that time, from then to now, we've enrolled almost 22,000 students, and 15,000 of those have completed one of these courses. Through those 15,000 completions, we've successfully averted 12,274 days of out-of-school suspension, and just 2,337 this year. And that was as of last Monday. So the numbers, obviously, it's already higher by now. So we're very excited about that. We've at least met that goal of hopefully avoiding some out-of-school suspension, keeping kids in school where they can get more help. And we've even seen some really promising data come out from our evaluation surveys. So every student that completes the course answers a few questions about it. And at least over last year, so these are kind of aggregated by year, but for the 22-23 school year, about 85% of middle and high school students agreed or strongly agreed that they would be less likely to use e-cigarettes in the future because of information they learned in the course. So, really the main goal is to avoid out-of-school suspension wherever possible. But if we can also lead students to, hopefully reconsider their vaping and make a quit attempt, that's just extra bonus, a nice cherry on top, right? So that's all I've got for you today. I'm going to wrap it up so we have a little bit of time for questions.
Right. Thank you, Robert. I really like how the approach to providing the resources for the schools so they can offer an alternative to suspension at the state level. So we do have a question, and please, if you have additional questions, go ahead and put them into our Q&A. And here's a question for our panelists. How do you engage with the parents? And the second question to that is, how do you engage if parents are not engaged? What do you do with that? Leanne, would you like to answer, or Kyle?
Sure. So I'll just say, because the parent has to come get their student, we have a packet of information that goes to them that kind of shows them what's going to happen, what the process is, and also some additional information about like the young brain and that it's ready to take risks at 13. And we actually want students to take risks, healthy risks, like try out for a play and try a new instrument and things like that. And so with parents, they are part of the response plan. Now, some might go, I'm not doing it, or they have their own struggles with using, or so we try to find maybe another healthy adult in the student's life that could come and be part of the process. And so that has worked to have, because there will be a few times that a parent is like, peace out, I'm not going to help with this. Or sometimes they get mad, like, I can't believe she took my weed. So trying to find another healthy adult in the community. And sometimes students will ask if one of their coaches could be part of that meeting, or a teacher. And that, just like Kyle was saying, we have a voluntary process where a student could come forward or bring a friend before they get caught and get help. But yeah, engaging parents, we do a number of parent sessions. We do a tip of the month that goes out to superintendent's newsletter that explains the process. Lots of tabling to explain it. And any age group you ask, if you ask a fifth grade and go, hey, what do you think someone's going to do when they get kicked out? Probably still use. So there's no one going like, this is a stupid idea, you should really suspend kids. Like, no one has said that.
And from my end of it, if they come to me directly and want to start their conversation, I don't want to instantly go straight to mom and dad, because I think that's going to put up a wall that I feel like this is their way of reaching out subtly. And rather than, I guess, the phrase carrot or stick, I think it might be too much stick for that like immediate moment. So we work really small, gradual baby steps. I don't end up like hiding everything from the parent, but if anything, I'm there with that student, like to make that first phone call or talk to them. I've even been asked to do a community night in the next couple of weeks at our school, so I can talk to parents directly also. about all this stuff too. I am by no means an expert in anything. I just have what I think is just my own life experiences, and I offer love and support, and I let that take me from there to start making these relationships and connections.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have noticed a couple of questions about penalizing students and what we call our PUP laws, which is possession, usage, purchasing of tobacco products. And those are not best practices, and there's not evidence of those working to prevent youth from using tobacco products. So I do see some questions about criminalizing students, and that is not just like suspensions are not don't help them, neither do the laws that criminalize them. Well, I've really enjoyed our session, and thank you for providing the wealth of knowledge, and thank you for your experiences and everything you're doing to ensure that youth are getting the help that they need. This conversation has been excellent. I also want to thank our attendees for attending today, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Take care, everyone.